Good morning and good afternoon and good evening, everyone. Welcome to Alluxio Product School. I'm thrilled to see all of you here today. My name is Jing Wen, and I'm a product manager at Alluxio. Here with me is Greg. Greg has over 30 years in the software industry with a background in big data technology. And we're happy to have Greg here as the lead solution engineer at Alluxio as he helps our customers evaluate and integrate the Alluxio data orchestration technology into their enterprise data strategies. And some of you might not be familiar with Alluxio, especially the feature of the enterprise edition. And that's why we created the Alluxio Product School series to provide more details. And today we'll be talking about the best practice of Alluxio and Apache Ranger. So at the end of the presentation, we'll have time for live Q&As. Please submit your questions during the talk on our Slack general channel, and I will help to direct the questions to Greg. And then you can see the Slack channel which is alluxio.io/Slack. So if you, however, have any trouble joining Slack, you can just feel free to submit any questions by the webinar platform Q&A. So without further ado, let's hear about Alluxio and Ranger from Greg. Greg, go ahead.
Excellent. Thank you, Jingwing. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Okay, let's begin. So I'm going to make this, I'm going to go into the slideshow mode. Here's our agenda for today. We're going to be talking obviously about Alluxio and Apache Ranger integration. We're going to talk about why Apache Ranger centralized access policy management is even needed. And then we're going to talk about some best practices with regards to using Alluxio with Apache Ranger. So why do we need centralized access management of policies? And obviously back in times previous, where systems were deployed in a homogeneous way, where you had applications and databases and data stores tightly coupled, there wasn't a big need for centralized policy management because the permissions were either hard-coded in the application itself. There was a fixed number of users that were known. They had physical security where the system wasn't even connected to the internet and was a local network only. So it wasn't really needed in that type of environment because of that homogeneous, those homogeneous attributes in standalone mode. Then people started distributing application components. So applications started accessing more than one database or data store, sometimes a combination of operational data stores and data warehouses. And also components were written in a more generic way so they could be shared across application domains. So now you're supporting different types of user groups with heterogeneous data sources. Some were transactional in nature, some were reporting in nature. But the permissions started, becoming a little harder to maintain because of that many-to-many relationship between users and data sources and application components and data sources. Add to that more recent developments with the data lake. Now you have kind of going back to a centralized model, but that centralized data lake is not always complete. So there's still a need to go back to operational data stores and traditional data warehouses. And you've got even more users coming on board in a more rapid fashion. You've got, application components accessing the data lake. You've got end users using things like Jupyter Lab Notebook and other Python-based environments or Spark-based environments. They're doing machine learning and training, and they're doing analytics using Spark and other environments. So to bring on more users more rapidly, it becomes really important to have a centralized policy management system like Apache Ranger. Any questions on this? Well, we'll save questions to the end. So what is Apache Ranger? Well, Apache Ranger was created initially to support all the access to data in the Hadoop environment, so the Hadoop ecosystem, whether it be accessing HDFS directly or using Hive schemas or using HBase. There needed to be a central place to access those data domains across the dozens of ecosystem tools that came with the Hadoop platform. Apache Ranger is bundled with the major players, including Hortonworks and Cloudera, which is now one platform. It's also bundled with independent products like Privacera. And then there's also the ability to use Apache Ranger from the open source code, where we have some customers who have compiled it themselves and sometimes even modified it themselves, but generally compiled it themselves and deployed it as a standalone centralized policy management system. When you deploy Apache Ranger, if you look at the left side of this slide, first you've got the major components, including the Ranger Policy Manager. That's the main component. But to keep the manager in sync with the current state of users and groups, there's a Ranger user sync module that integrates with LDAP and Active Directory and other identity management systems at the enterprise level. And then you have Ranger administrators who can create Ranger policies and store them in the policy store, which can be a local database like MySQL, or it could be more distributed. And then on the right side of the screen, you have applications that are integrating with Apache Ranger. So now you got data consuming applications that employ a plugin. So what is a plugin? Well, a Ranger plugin is specific to a data store usually. So you might have one for Elasticsearch. You can have a plugin for MySQL. You can have a plugin for HDFS. You might have a plugin for Hive, the Hive Metastore, things like that. So the plugins are used by the consuming application to determine what the policies are for accessing data in whatever the data store is. It could be an operational data store, it could be a data warehouse, it could be a data lake, it could be, whatever. So that's how it's architected for data consuming applications. So what is Alluxio? Many of you have signed up for this webinar because you've read about Alluxio, or you might even be using the open source version or the enterprise version of Alluxio. But there's some issues with how we're deploying data in today's world that need to be addressed. I mean, obviously, as people start separating compute from data and scaling them independently, and even locating them in different places, it adds to low performance sometimes if you have to make multiple network hops to get to the data. Poor accessibility, because now you've taken the data away from the compute, and there's different rules on how to access that data. Sometimes there's different security environments, so that adds to poor accessibility. The scaling becomes harder to deal with, and then you've de-emphasized the self-service nature of data. Obviously in the last 10 to 15 years, we've been promoting self-service data, but as you disaggregate data from compute, it actually makes it a little more complex, where you have brittle ETL jobs that have to be employed to make sure data is copied from one place to another, and it's not always reliable. And when it is, it's fixed, and it doesn't really allow data outside of that ETL process to be accessed. So yeah, self-service is a problem. The added cost of management because of the heterogeneous nature of the data stores located in on-prem and in cloud locations becomes an issue. And even in the cloud, if you're accessing S3 buckets, there's sometimes reliability issues, especially if you're going from on-prem to cloud, or from one region and or availability zone to another. So there's a lot of issues, making it more complex and less secure as you deploy disaggregated data environments. So the need for a data orchestration platform to help bring those things together and reduce cost and better performance and provide that unified security environment, a tool like Alluxio is needed to kind of be the intermediary between workloads, whether they be machine learning and analytics or traditional applications doing traditional read and writes, and the underlying data stores, which can be, like I said, they could be on-prem or they could be in the cloud. They could be, traditional storage systems on-prem, or they could be a new generation of object stores in the cloud. So Alluxio solves those problems by being that intermediary. It provides data locality even when the data is not local. I know that sounds weird, but Alluxio does support a feature that it can put data closer to the workloads while still allowing it to be based and anchored in its underlying store. So Alluxio can do short circuit reads even when the compute is not co-located with the data. And if you need more information on that, we could have a separate meeting and talk about that. It promotes better data accessibility because now you've got a single place to go to get to the data, whether the data is in on-prem storage or in cloud storage. That data can be accessed from one place from user workloads. In fact, in some places, when we employ a unified namespace environment, the end user may not even know that data is coming from both Google Cloud Storage and Amazon S3 buckets at the same time. So data accessibility is vastly improved with Alluxio. And then we support, getting back to that self-service goal of making data on demand for ML applications, analytics, and traditional applications. Okay, so let's talk about using Alluxio with Apache Ranger. This architecture looks very similar to the previous slide, where the left side of the screen is pretty much the same. This is the Ranger architecture on the left side. But on the right side now, we've got Alluxio master daemons, the master nodes we call them. There's usually 3, 5, or 7 master nodes. Those are accessing the Ranger policy manager via a Ranger plugin. So Alluxio has integrated with the Ranger plugin technology so that we can refresh the policies on a regular basis when they change. And we can also generate audit logs and send them to the Ranger audit store. So when the masters refresh their view of the world based on the Ranger policies, they then pass those on to the worker nodes who are actually doing the reads and writes on the understores. And those understores can be HDFS, but they can also be things like S3 buckets, even S3 compatible buckets, things like Ceph and Gluster and NFS mounts and Google Cloud Storage and the like. So now you've got end users using Python applications or ML workloads or analytical workloads, Spark and other things like that can be used to access Alluxio master nodes who are then enforcing policies based on Apache Ranger rules and then accessing the underlying under file systems. So how do we use it? So with Alluxio, you can use Apache Ranger integration in 2 main ways. The first way is to just enforce existing Ranger HDFS access policies. So if you're a Hadoop shop and you've been using either the Apache Ranger that comes with HTTP or Cloudera's distribution, and you've already been using it to enforce HDFS and Hive policies, you can just simply use Alluxio in that mode. So it's very easy to set up because you don't have to create any new Ranger services. You don't have to create any new policies. You basically can just tell Alluxio to use those existing policies. And it's useful when you have either one or more HDFS file systems that are being managed by Ranger. And you're using Alluxio with mainly just HDFS. You're not using it with other under file system types. So how would you do that? You would basically tell Alluxio to enable plugins for authorization in the Alluxio properties file, and then you would tell Alluxio where to find all the setup files for Apache Ranger. By default, it's going to look in the conf directory, but you can put it elsewhere if you need to. You also have to tell Alluxio what version of the plugin to use, because there are different versions that come with HDP versus Cloudera versus Privacera versus standard open source version. And we support, a ton of different versions, and I can give you those details later on if you need them. In the Ranger setup, you simply have to mention or reference the service name that's employed to administer those HDFS, those current and existing HDFS services or policies. So it's an existing Ranger service name that you would reference in the Ranger setup files. Again, this is for people who are using Alluxio to mainly access HDFS. And one of the main reasons people do that is because they're trying to reduce the load on their Hadoop cluster, because the Hadoop cluster is fixed, it's not growing, it has a certain amount of compute and storage, they can't handle more workloads, so they can use Alluxio to cache data from Hadoop into Alluxio and then redirect workloads to Alluxio, leaving the core Hadoop cluster to other workloads that are maybe either higher priority or have already been resident there and can't be moved. A second way to use Alluxio with Apache Ranger is to create a new service and new policies specifically for Alluxio. So Alluxio implements a virtual file system with unified namespace technology and caching technology that allows you to support not just HDFS, but also cloud storage, other on-prem storage, and things like that. So Alluxio users that are using Python or other environments, or using machine learning environments or analytic environments, can access Alluxio and through the unified namespace, access data in different heterogeneous data stores at the same time. So when you have a model like this, you can actually use Apache Ranger to implement access to not only HDFS, but all the other file systems or data stores and under file systems that we call them, that Alluxio is accessing. So now you might have a service a Ranger service that tells Alluxio to allow certain people access to certain sensitive data, and other people would be denied access to it through the Ranger policies. This becomes very powerful because now you're looking at a virtual file system that's not pegged to any specific understore, and you don't have to set up rules for every understore individually. You can kind of use them in a unified way through Alluxio. It's very powerful. So how do you do that? Well, it's similar to the previous method. You have to enable plugins through Alluxio and tell Alluxio where to find all the Apache Ranger setup files. But in the main Apache Ranger XML file, instead of specifying an existing Ranger service, you actually specify a new one that doesn't exist yet, and then you define it in the admin screen with the Apache Ranger admin screen. Now, in this example, I'm calling it new Ranger HDFS service name. There's different types of plugins, and Alluxio has chosen to use the HDFS type, but it doesn't restrict it from only managing HDFS policies. It can actually use it for, like I said, policy management for any of the under file systems that Alluxio is integrated with. So how do we do that? Well, you'd go into your Apache Ranger admin screen. It may not look just like this. You might have one that's customized, through Privacera, like Privacera 4.7 and 6.1, that sort of thing. Or you might be using the one that comes with HTTP or Cloudera, but it's going to look similar to this. You basically just define a new HDFS service type. You hit the plus sign there, and then once you do that, you click on the Add New Policy button, and you start adding policies that define what groups and what users can access which Alluxio paths in the Alluxio virtual file system in the virtual namespace. Now, if you implement this second method, and not everybody has, the Ranger administrators have not yet defined policies for all the sensitive data that's being accessed by Alluxio in the under file systems, you can still have a catch-all rule for data that's not being managed by a specific Ranger policy. So we recommend that you set up a UMask inside of Alluxio. So if people do create new files through Alluxio, it'll default to a very restrictive permissions model. And then also we recommend that you go in and do a change mod on directories where you want them to be more restricted than maybe they currently are. And that'll restrict, because what'll happen is when Alluxio is trying to determine the access method or the access permissions for a specific path for a specific user or group, it'll look at the plugin first, and if it doesn't find one in Ranger, it'll actually default to these POSIX style file permissions. So let's go and do a little demo and show you how that works. I just want to confirm that everybody can still see my screen. Let me see if I can bring up my Slack thing. No, okay. Yeah, if you can't see my screen, ping me. Okay, so what I have here, I'm going to bring up a couple things up here. This is an Alluxio web UI. If you've ever used Alluxio, you're probably familiar with it. It gives you an overview of how many worker nodes are online. This one is a very small cluster. I only have one. It shows me who the leader is. I only have one leader, or one master, but I could have had 3 or 5 or 7. I can browse data. I can look at worker node stats and things like that. I also have an Apache Ranger console, so I'm going to log into that as well because I'm running Ranger in this environment. Okay, so you can see when I log into Apache Ranger's admin screen, I don't have any services defined yet. Specifically, I don't have any HDFS services. So if I try to access data in my under file system, which again can be HDFS, but it could also be S3 or GCS or NFS or whatever cluster. If I try to access certain things, let me. Do I have it here? So I'm logging in as a user, and this user is defined in Ranger. If I go to user groups, I can see I have a couple users defined, user 1 and user 2. They're both members of a group called Alluxio users. So I do have some users defined, but I don't have any policies defined. So if I type in a command like Alluxio using the Alluxio CLI, Alluxio FS LS, whatever one of the subdirectories is, I'm not sure I can even access it. Yeah, I can right here. If I try to go to a sensitive data directory, like sensitive data 1, it's going to say permission denied by authorization plugin. So what happens is Alluxio checked with Ranger, and Ranger didn't have any policies for user 1 or for Alluxio users for that path. So it just denied access, and that's good. That's how you want it to behave if you don't have any policies defined. But let's go ahead and define a service. So I'm going to create a service. I'm going to define the admin user that Alluxio is going to use to get policy updates. I'm going to tell it the Alluxio path that we're going to be using as we administer these policies. So Alluxio endpoint is generally what you're going to use. Similar to if you were going to be using HDFS, it would have been HDFS://. I'm going to enable authorization, and then I'm going to give it the, I am using signed certificates for this implementation, so I do have to give it the common name that I used in the signed certificate for it to work correctly with Apache Ranger. So I'm going to create this service. Okay, now I have a service, and I'm going to go into that service, and I'm going to start creating some policies. So I'm going to say add policy. I'm going to create a new policy. We're going to call this Alluxio user access. No, actually, I think I have a better name. Let me go back. Let me go to my notes here just a minute. Let's see. I want to call it. Okay, so we're going to call it allow access to sensitive data 1. In the path for that, you can provide one or more paths for this policy. So there's 2 kinds of policies in Ranger. There's allow and deny. Since I've already used my deny at the Alluxio level, I could create a root deny here for everything, but since I already have kind of a default deny, I'm going to have an allow. So I'm going to allow access to /sensitive data 1, and I'm going to allow that access to a specific group of users. So down here under the allow conditions, I'm going to pick Alluxio users, and I'm going to add the permissions read and execute. Notice I'm not clicking on write, only read, and I'm going to leave it at that. So now we're going to save this. Let's see, policy label. I don't need a label. I could put a description, but I'm going to add this I'm going to add this policy. Okay, now when you're in the admin screen, you can go to audit and you can look at the plugin status, and you can see if Alluxio is checking in and getting what do you call them, policy. So this one's outdated. So because I just updated it, we have to wait a few seconds for Alluxio to get the new policy. So, and if I try it now, it may not work yet. Until that policy is updated, there is a slight delay. Okay, so it did update the policies. So now that I've created a new policy in Ranger, it allows the group called Alluxio users, of which user 1 is a member, access to a directory called sensitive data. Now I can read, that's execute. I just exercised the execute permission. Let's see if I can actually read some data. So if I look at what's in data set 1, so let's test the read part of the policy. So I'm going to do Alluxio FS cat, and I'm going to give it the name of an actual file. Okay, so I was able to read that data. It's only 2 lines of a CSV file. Now let's test write, because I did not explicitly give write permissions to these users. So if I try something like Alluxio FS, copy from local, etc modd, and then try to put it into the sensitive directory. Let's see if it allows that. Okay, so it did not allow that. It says permission denied by authorization plugin, because Alluxio was looking at the policy managed by Ranger. Ranger did allow execute and read, but it did not allow write, and that was enforced in Alluxio. And granted, this is not even an HDFS endpoint. You know, Alluxio could be pointing to Google Cloud Storage or Azure ADLS volumes, or it could be S3 buckets. It doesn't really matter. These are implemented at the Alluxio virtual level, and thus controls access to data in the under file system as well. Okay, let me see if I can bring up my Slack channel. I wasn't looking at Slack, so if there's any questions, we can get to them here. Where is my Slack channel? There it is. Okay, Mel, wait, who's going to be kind of wrapping things up? I don't see any questions in the Slack channel. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, thank you, Greg. It's a great presentation and wonderful to hear about all the security benefits brought by the integration of Alluxio and Ranger. So while we're waiting for questions to come in from Slack channel, I'll take advantage to ask my question. So okay. What are the any other security features of Alluxio that we should be aware of? Maybe just like a short, brief description.
Sure. Obviously, the enterprise version of Alluxio, as it's deployed in production environments around the world, it needs to be, you know, very secure in those production environments. So we do support full encryption, TLS encryption, encryption as data, as Alluxio daemons communicate with each other. Those connections can be encrypted with signed certificates. We also support encryption at rest. So as data is being stored, it's also being encrypted. And we also support what we call northbound security, where you can authenticate users that are reaching out into Alluxio and requesting read or write access. Now this is different than Apache Ranger. Apache Ranger is authorization. We also support authentication through Kerberos and other means. So we can set up Alluxio so that users who are interacting with Alluxio have to be authenticated by a Kerberos ticket or by another means. We also support authentication between Alluxio and the understores or the under file systems. So as you're accessing S3 buckets or ADLS volumes or Google Cloud Storage or accessing HDFS, you can set up authentication between Alluxio and those under file systems. And for some of the under file system types, Alluxio supports impersonation, so that if I'm Greg and and I'm accessing Alluxio through my Spark job, and I've got a Kerberos ticket, my Kerberos ticket will be sent to Alluxio, and Alluxio will authenticate me via that ticket. But then when Alluxio accesses, say, HDFS, it can actually access HDFS using that same ticket. So instead of accessing it as a user called Alluxio, it can access HDFS and impersonate the user Greg, so that any any access environment information that restricts Greg's access will be enforced because Alluxio is impersonating the under file system. And obviously Apache Ranger combined with authentication, so now you've got authorization and authentication together, it adds to a very strong security environment. So good question.
Cool. Yeah, good to know. And I guess those are all the enterprise edition features, right? Cool.
Yes, that's correct. Some of those are available also in the open source, but not all of them.
Gotcha. And what's the next step for Alluxio in terms of security, either with Ranger, any additional integration, or like in general?
Yeah, so the Alluxio enterprise team is always working on new features and enablements for our customers. So we're looking at stronger security with S3 integration, and basically making it more secure as we access enterprise-oriented under file systems. So we're working on things like that. We're working on security in the Kubernetes environment. So making sure that all the security implementations that people use, like OPA in Kubernetes, are also working with Alluxio. So yeah, we're always working on new things, to supplement what we do with Apache Ranger.
Cool. It's a very complicated space.
Yes.
We'll have one more question on the crowd. So does the platform record all the user actions with something like a audit log?
Say it again.
So does the platform record like all the user actions with something like a audit log?
Yes. So if you're using Apache Ranger integration like we've outlined today, the Ranger audit service is employed. So you can actually have the Alluxio master nodes as users make requests for data, either read data or write data. Those requests can be sent to the Ranger audit store, which is usually Elasticsearch, but it doesn't have to be. Most people use Elasticsearch with Solr, but you could also use databases, and some people use HDFS as a target for that. So yeah, for that. Now, if you're not using Apache Ranger, then Alluxio has its own audit log internally that can track all of that too, and you can send it to Prometheus, which can then show it in Grafana and things like that for stats, or you can send it to Splunk, and it can be used for storage in Splunk for days, weeks, months, or years, or however long you keep your audit information. So that's a very good question.
Cool. Yeah. I don't see any other questions. Yeah. Okay. I think let me double check one more time. Yeah. If not, I think we can continue to feed the questions into the general channel. Again, that is alluxio.io/Slack, and Greg can answer that offline. So
Sure.
with that, that'll be a wrap for today. So I hope you all enjoyed the talk, and thanks, Greg, again. Please, just join the Slack channel for more discussions.
Okay, thanks for everybody's time. I enjoyed it.